He has a good Trump one on there now too.
Oh yeah. This I just grabbed this because it's from like yesterday, and I thought it was so fucking us. It's like it's siege pill Trump. Listen to this.
In many ways, we're living in hell right now.
That's from his last fucking rally.
It's true.
Yeah.
Sheer dynamite.
Yeah. He's gone fucking siege. But I guess that was also his initial inauguration speech was also like it was something like that too, right?
Yeah.
Like this is a doomed world. You know, I don't remember what he said, but the American nightmare?
Yeah, something
like that. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. You went from hope and change to believing in hell.
Yeah.
In many ways, we're living in hell right now.
And so we are. Let's talk about some of the guys that got us there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
All right. Welcome to The Empire Never Ended with Boris, Fritz, and Ray.
Oh, hey.
Hey. We are back on the American Legion today. I'm going to tell you right now, I got some things to cover here because, I'm not going to... I don't want to give these guys more than 1 month at a time. At least they've had enough of our time in America already. You know, it's 100 years of this shit. So they don't need to take up 100 years of our podcast. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, so I'm gonna get through where we left off in basically like 1919 at their founding. We pretty much just got to their founding.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm gonna take us all the way through the Second World War. I hope. Yeah, but we're going to do a little reviewing. So, I know I'm harshing everybody's vibe here. You know, we always have this nice repartee, this back and forth.
Yes.
This sparkling dialogue that the people trialogue that the people love. But I just have so much crazy shit I want to say.
I mean, I think it would be good to have a little recap before we dive in, no? Because it's been...
Yeah,
we had some stuff in between. We had eugenics.
Yeah, we've been keeping this theme of like upper class dickholes ruining everything for everyone. But back on the Patreon.
It's interesting you are announcing it like this. I'm kind of surprised that there's so many crazy things. I was thinking that the American Legion is a more kind of a normal group compared to the others.
Well, okay. Is they are. I mean, like the thing is you're looking at an organization that has had consistently like millions of people.
Yeah.
So like 90% of them at least are going to be pretty normal. Like just like people.
I mean, normal can mean lots of things.
It can mean lots of things, but I mean, not somebody that's going to scare you or act randomly in some way. Like, most people now it's the largest veterans organization, so it has a shit ton of veterans. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
And it's everywhere. Their halls are
everywhere.
Yeah.
But we've already started talking about the formations of this organization and put it in the context of the first Red Scare and all that. I'm going to do a little review here for us. But just kind of also I want to set up a little quote to kick us off. Again, part of the habit of putting the quotes of great people, when discussing great people. So a few months before the Centralia, Washington lynching that we talked about in the previous episode of a wobbly named Everest, which followed a battle between his comrades and an assault by American legionnaires, which would be suspiciously, if you recall, at the same time as the first ever National Legion Conference in St. Louis, Missouri. So Teddy Roosevelt Jr. wrote this in the already existing American Legion Weekly at that same time. All right. Well, a few months before, rather, the battle.
There has been much to talk about the Bolsheviki,
the IWW and the Red Flag Socialists. Many people have expressed fears concerning the attitude of our army on these menaces. There is no need for such fear. The strongest bulwark this country can have against lawless anarchy is this society, composed of servicemen.
So I know that might have been a little confusing, but what he said was, if you were afraid that we were going to turn into some American squadristi, don't be afraid. We're definitely going to do that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. It was also confusing because I didn't know that Junior was a member of the Order. Because he sounded like...
Yeah, I was a little bummed.
Okay, because here's how I put him together in my head. Like, I put his voice in that big basket that I include with like Charles Lindbergh, Jordan Peterson, and Bob Matthews, right? They for me, they're all in like the exact same place.
Stand up like men.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know why. I feel like because it's some kind of like compromise accent, because he wouldn't have, because the Roosevelts, even though they were, this is Teddy Roosevelt the third.
Yeah.
Right? They were like dynastic colonial money and shit.
Yeah.
But they didn't use like second and third. They used junior and senior because they wanted to seem more like the people. You know?
Yeah.
So I don't think he would have played up this like aristocratic sounding thing. But I also really see him as being kind of a dorky fail son type. That like, so that's why he ends up in that basket.
This is spiritually his voice.
It's spiritually, he's part of that archetype. He's part of this archetype. So last time we talked about the origins of the American Legion, particularly their founding para-state militia, American Legion Incorporated, created to push the U.S. into the First World War, which it did. The founding members, including young Teddy Jr. there, TJ, I like to call him.
Oh, TJ, yeah.
Went on to form...
It's better than Junior.
It's better than Junior, which is also pretty good, though. Let's be honest. Went on to form the core of the Allied Expeditionary Force. That's like... so basically what I'm trying to say is this Plattsburgh group of militiamen.
Allied or American?
American. So like they had like 24,000 militia members, remember, before the war. So these guys became the initial core of soldiers and officers in Europe. And so there, American Legion Incorporated guys, often referred to as the Plattsburgh Group because of where they trained, they busied themselves by sending Americans to the killing fields, and as with original Legion member Bill Donovan, setting up the rudiments of a new American intelligence kind of system that was laser focused on the commies making trouble in Russia from the get-go.
Yeah, that's Wild Bill Donovan.
That'd be Wild Bill Donovan. That's right. Founding member of American Legion Incorporated and American Legion pretty soon.
And basically the founder of CIA later on.
Yeah, like the grandfather.
Yeah, grandfather.
Right? Yeah. Yeah, like some of his students would make up the most insane core.
Yeah.
Of what was the CIA. Yeah.
Which says a lot because
we mentioned that film a few times already, so we can mention it again. The what's the name of it?
JFK. Is it JFK again?
Not right? JFK.
God damn it.
The one that's kind of based on Angleton, and Matt Damon plays the character that's based on. Is it The Good Shepherd?
It is The Good Shepherd.
Yeah. That's like was directed by Robert De Niro, and Robert De Niro is playing Wild Bill Donovan in it.
Yeah.
I mean, all the character based on him.
Yeah.
It might be fun to watch at some point.
Yeah.
In late 1918, this Plattsburgh group, with both the military and the U.S. government's blessing and charter, began planning the revival of their old group in a new form, publicly dedicated to the well-being of American war veterans, but in fact, single-mindedly terrified of the revolutionary potential of these veterans, were they to be seduced by the Bolshevikis.
I like that they, in the like very early, like in the 20s, they use the term Bolsheviki.
Yeah.
Like, you see that a lot in
Bolsheviki.
Yes. Oh, wow. Damn, you got that on the soundboard, my man.
I did.
Hell yeah.
I think that one was Maksa Prdelich, maybe, or
that's
forget which one of them it was.
Me no Bolsheviki, me Serbian fella.
yeah. This was the cop, though.
Bolsheviki.
Yes.
Yeah. Siberian,
Syrian, Bolsheviki.
Me Protestant. I really miss those guys. Maybe we should do another episode on those exact same fucking skits. They're so good. I don't think anyone would mind.
There are more that I didn't include in that episode.
Let's
could
pull them out. They're so good. It's a good antidote to these motherfuckers because it's the same time. Like this is, Sima fucking what was his name? Kurza something, and then Laza Yayarosh were coming in.
All women crazy for me eggs.
Yes. And then these motherfuckers were like the ones yelling at them and beating them up and shit. Yeah. Calling them like alien slackers. Which, to be fair, Laza Yayarosh was.
His whole thing is like how he fucked over the US government.
Yes, he's awesome. He's a hero. Yeah. Oh my God.
Bolsheviki.
Love it.
Hey there, it's Fritz here in editing. I'm realizing as I'm listening to this that this episode's going out to the free listeners who probably have no idea what the fuck we're talking about. And we're referencing a series of radio sketch comedy Tamburitzen recordings that we listened to way back early in Arc 4. And these were put out by Yugoslav immigrants, and they were pretty awesome. And that would be around 1929, 1930. So if you're interested in that, that's on our Patreon. Quite a few episodes back. All right.
So anyway, back to the assholes. They form a caucus in Paris in 1918 first, and then in Minneapolis before their ultimate national convention in 1919 in St. Louis. So we spent a lot of time on the founding discussions and debates in that initial convention and watched in real time how more like moderate voices were either kind of silenced or edged out through these jingoistic calls to form like anti-commie kill squads. Like not in those words, but that is actually what ends up happening. Or with like Wild Bill Donovan kind of quietly sequestering protesters off to the side for little discussions that never come back to the assembly, never get voted on, So we also gave in that episode maybe too much time to Jarek and Lorna, if you remember them, a couple of legionnaires. Who,
from the modern propaganda video.
Exactly.
I kind of love that though. I would enjoy watching that again.
Who are actual veterans.
They are, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, veterans can be, middling actors too.
Yeah.
Anybody can really. I feel like we are at times on this show. So the legionaries, they gave us the kind of the official line in their own words. We watched like the part 0 of like an 8-part documentary series. So if you want more Jarek and Lorna, there is plenty of it out there. We took a look at the preamble to the Legion Constitution as well as the Legion's own analysis of it. So if anyone thinks that I'm not being fair in this episode, definitely give the previous episode a listen first, because in this episode, this episode's the fun one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that founding group has a bunch more freaks in it that we discussed last time and who are going to pop in for a quick howdy do now and then today as well. But when we left the American Legion at their official founding at the end of 1919, we left them with about 1 million members, full-on support from Yankee industrialists, one of whom they elected president, a hardcore anti-Bolshevik slacker platform, some half-hearted talk about veteran support, which wouldn't fucking come until after the Second World War, by the way.
Oh, okay.
Like their one fucking mission.
But then when they did, it came in a pretty major way.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? Because they passed the GI Bill.
Yeah, the GI. This is like the Legion passed the GI Bill, but they had been, with all of their power and policy influence that they were able to wield, the one thing that they were supposed to be doing, they didn't pull together until the next World War. Like, come on, they got so much else done in that time.
Yep.
They they had a few dead wobblies under their belt, and a lot of the political machinery of the country, like, quote, in their palm, as they themselves put it. And despite the Legion's reputation among more progressive veterans for being very densely centralized and dictatorial in its dealings with posts that stray from official doctrine, in this episode, we're going to see that, like, comically enough, the Legion had its own like states' rights program, basically.
Hmm.
So they had this dictatorial top brass system. I mean, it makes sense for like a military organization, like but with especially the southern states, they were a lot more hands off and were very open about letting the Southern Post make their own decisions about things like,
I'd imagine racial things,
especially that.
Yeah.
So there is this
States' rights.
states' rights, yeah. And it would also kind of let them wipe their hands of a lot of the darker shit that went on Legion-wise. Yeah, but the brass, as we'll see in this, are the craziest of the bunch. Like the top central authority, they're the nuttiest. But just trying to worm like an entry point for us here. We're going to mostly go chronologically. Now that I said chronologically, let me just undo that. After World War II, there were a lot of more progressive, we'll say, posts that had like positive attitudes towards unionization, towards integration, all that kind of stuff. They would get shut down. One after the other, and not even. I said post-war, but this is also true of the 30s too. Like unions, posts that posed political critiques would kind of quietly vanish. They would get briefly suspended, pending an investigation that would never happen, and then that would be the end of it. You know, so we'll see some of that. But the Southern ones were able to like blatantly flaunt official central rules without any consequences, like ever. You know, for example, the Legion's founding Congress explicitly forbade Legion posts from fielding or supporting political candidates under Legion auspices. That said, let's hear about a 1920 election in where else but Atlanta, Georgia. We're back in Atlanta. At its, one of its most horrifying times. So basically,
it's had a lot of
them.
times.
Yeah, this is one of them for sure. So basically, the Georgia Post, Legion Post in Atlanta, was openly supporting, both financially and politically, a lawyer and politician named Hoke Smith. Hoke Smith. Hoke was known for a couple of things, mostly disenfranchising black voters in Georgia in the first decade of the 20th century, defunding their education, and constantly going on racist rants that went so hard, he was blamed for sparking the 1906 Atlanta race riot.
Oh, wow.
Hoke was running against his own former mentor, named Tom Watson, for the United States Senate. The Legion claimed that Tom Watson was a pacifist piece of shit war opposer and openly declared him a Bolshevist. Tom, the Bolshevist that he was, rallied his buddies in the Klan and sicked them on the Legion and walked away with the victory.
Yeah. The peace-loving Bolsheviks of the Klan.
So once again, the Klan makes Atlanta safe from American fascists.
It's like, no, we do bigotry in one way here.
Yes, we don't really accept competition. Of course, the last time we talked about the Klan facing off against some fascists was when they put on their cop uniforms and battled the Colombians Incorporated there. It was Ray's last free ep that we had.
I guess they don't like any kind of challenges to their authority. No.
They do not. They already have a state, thank you very much, and it's called Georgia. So the Klan and the Legion maintained, and I suppose maybe still maintain, a sort of frenemy relationship. The Klan eventually would find itself uniquely singled out by the Legion as un-American, though almost always this was in reference to their kind of non-universal opposition to the First World War. It wasn't like an official Klan thing. It was just, it averaged out that way in the leadership. So they likened the Klan to Bolshevik slackers. You know, that's how they put everything. So by the 1940s, however, Legion posts in the Deep South were like...
They criticized the Klan from the right.
They did, yes, as peaceniks. And by the 1940s, Legion posts in the Deep South were infested with Klansmen, including local leadership. And despite like the odd proclamation now and then, the Legion did next to nothing about this. Basically, until the mid-1940s, the only thing the Legion publicly said about the Klan, beyond accusing them of slackerism, was this:
The National Executive Committee considers as unfriendly to our nation any group which condemns a comrade because of a creed or belief.
Which I think the IWW guys thought was pretty funny. Because at the same time, they were trying to put this guy Hoke, this race riot guy Hoke, into power. The National Committee was doing their best to purge a guy named Louis Post from the Department of Labor for being a Georgist. That's one of those you don't hear much about.
Yeah.
He was probably one of the last ones, and they wanted him gone, you know? Of course, they called him a Bolsheviki.
Yeah.
But,
Bolsheviki.
he was a fucking Georgist. Like, the friendliest socialists
Yeah.
for Americans. So also in 1920, our old friend, both from the Last Legion episode and from our America First episode back in Arc 3, so you know he's bad then, Hamilton Fish III. That was of the Stuyvesant fortune, you recall. Fucking co-founder of the American Legion all the way back to the Plattsburgh Group, himself defied Legion rules by personally running for Congress in New York's Putnam Dutchess district and winning clearly by appealing to Legion veterans who canvassed for him. So in Congress, Hamilton Fish would authorize the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. He would promise but never actually build another monument for the black soldiers he commanded in the AAF, and built stuff like local veterans hospitals and things like that. Eventually, in the 1930s, Fish would meet a weird dude that we know named George Viereck. We've talked plenty about Viereck without him having his own episode, to whom he would lend out his congressional postage and printing budget for Viereck's Nazi propaganda.
Viereck we mentioned in the Yoki episode.
Oh,
Yeah,
he's
come up a few times.
Yeah, he's going to come up again today in a really funny way, actually. But Fish's election in 1920 did make for some complications in the internal politics of the Legion, which had members of both political parties. So the Legion's first president, the millionaire textile manufacturer and soon-to-be president of Prudential Insurance, Franklin D'Olier, set a standard for future presidents by renouncing any non-Legion political campaigning across the board. So the framework I'm trying to establish here is that you had centralized Legion dictates that had an unequal enforcement, essentially based on how Bolsheviki they thought you were. Yeah. So if you were a full-on like clan-infested post in the South, you could run somebody in an election. Apparently, if you were like trying to integrate black soldiers into your post in New York, your post might disappear. Because of some technicality, violation of some rule, you know? So this is kind of being laid out in 1920.
So that's getting a little too political.
Don't
get too political.
That's right. Exactly. Exactly. Yes. So by 1920 was also, I don't know if you guys know about this. This is kind of fallen out, I think, of our collective consciousness. But do you know Black Horror on the Rhine period? So this was where racist German imperialists got their asses handed to them by Senegalese soldiers fighting for the French army, and German commie types were organizing with these French black anti-colonial activists. So really,
we're talking about the First World War.
Talking about the First World War. So of course, ruling class like obsessions with black bodies turned into a giant rape scare, where these black soldiers were accused of basically doing like the reconstruction scenes from Birth of a Nation,
Right.
and plotting to overthrow the ruling order. So this was a huge, completely made up scandal.
They were eating
popped
chicken in the Bundestag. Or
No. The German soldiers, some of them, the fucking, especially some of the stupider officer corps, were straight up convinced that the Senegalese soldiers were going to eat them.
Okay.
Yeah. So Wilson ordered an investigation, which came back saying, like, yeah, that's just some racism there. Like, the Senegalese guys are actually really competent. They're doing a pretty good job of running shit. There's really nothing going on here. The American Legion did their own investigation because their legionnaires were very concerned about this black horror on the Rhine. And the American Legion determined that this was some kind of German propaganda because there were no black troops there, right? Like, they didn't say, hey, this is racist. Like, President Birth of a Nation said, hey, this is racist. They instead issued a statement of great concern regarding the allegations, but wanted to reassure their readership that there was no real problem since there are no black soldiers at all there. Amazing. So somehow, then it's probably not a surprise that letters to the editor, at least into the early 20s, even after they debunked this, incorrectly debunked it, but did debunk it officially. One of these like letters to the editor I read in the 20s read this.
I am a member of a Navy post and am somewhat chagrined that our admiral may not speak his mind, while almost any hyphenated horror on the Rhine combination seems to be able to get away with anything.
Hyphenated horror on the Rhine combination, meaning the hypothetical mixed race offspring from the mass rape of German women by Senegalese soldiers, which never, ever happened. Yeah? Do you remember the hyphenated Americans bit in the Last Legion ep?
Yes, vaguely. Remind us.
Yeah. Okay, that was Teddy Roosevelt, senior, right? The second. He said it was about how we don't, regardless of any classes, races, creeds, we all must be Americans. There are no hyphenated Americans. Mm-hmm. They set it up as like, we need a non-hyphenated American society to stand against the society of the rule of tyranny of the classes or the masses, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
We're not divided, yeah? So in this case, hyphenated is used to establish a mixed race,
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. It takes on a distinctly racial dimension suddenly here with this horror on the Rhine story. And it's, as far as this being like a letter to the editor from the readership, it's easy to just pass that off. But Justin Gray, one of the guys that was helping to run the Americanism Commission, who wrote this great book about how that shit went down, did write that these letters to the editor were investigated in full by the brass, that they were taken deadly seriously, and that they were only published after they went through these processes of accepting. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And just maybe a last word on that horror on the Rhine thing, that would remain in like German public consciousness, and Hitler would capitalize on it eventually as well. And kind of only at that point would it kind of fade out of, I'd say, like probably like the average legionary's mind too, but like up to that point, you can imagine it's in there somewhere.
And that's that all like Afro-Germans are products of rape from, bestial Senegalese soldiers.
Exactly. Interestingly enough, that very same letter to the editor contains a promotion of an interesting guy selling, quote, crosses that shine brightly in the dark, made in Germany, set with radium jewels. And who was this mysterious man offering a good Christian path to radium jaw? But none other than George Sylvester Vietic again.
Oh, damn, yeah.
This is what he was up to. It was just like showed up in a letter to the editor. He was like, you heard of this guy? He's a very interesting fella. What a weird fucking dude. So, again, if people don't remember, he was, again, a Nazi agent. He wrote the first non-heteronormative vampire stories ever and invented the energy vampire concept. It's his concept. So in a weird way, you could say he was the great-great-great-grandfather of the Temple of Blood.
Okay.
Whatever. And he was a paid agent of Hitler and all that. So anyway, that's just some Tenepot historical fun.
Important things.
Yes. It's just, we've covered him many times by accident now. He's just haunting all these corners of like the 20s and 30s. So meanwhile, the Legion had become the country's premier strikebreaker organization. A newsreel from Chicago showed Legionnaires busting into a crowd of striking workers with lead pipes and firearms, killing at least one in the process. Writing after a similar incident in Pennsylvania, journalist George Seldes noted that the sheriff of Beaver County, Charles O'Loughlin, deputized 200 of these attackers in that attack and was on record as saying this.
I immediately got William Schaefer, who was the commander of the American Legion post in Aliquippa, which is my hometown. I asked Mr. Schaefer if he could get me 75 boys with military experience. He told me, Charlie, I'll get you 150 if you want them. He did produce 75 men, whom he gathered in the Aliquippa police station.
I'm so glad he wasn't from Chicago in the end. So, and if you're wondering what happened to that whole, like, should we be a fascist death squad question from episode 1, the answer is yes. But, yeah. So, Seldes, the journalist continues, it was also testified that Schaefer, the commander of the American Legion post in Aliquippa, was an employee of Jones and Laughlin, the steel company which frequently employed armed men against its workers, and that the sheriff was a former chief of the Jones and Laughlin Coal and Iron Police. He came out of company police for the steel group, took over the sheriff's department, and now is like hiring legionnaires to like go and crack skulls.
And we also might recall that on the other side of this, Aliquippa came up in the last arc as being where that one communist priest was from that was getting his whole congregation who were, steel workers and J&L Steel striking all the time.
Yeah.
Then got himself defrocked. And
Yeah.
This is still from Seldis here. By the end of the year 1920, 50 acts of violence, none equal to murder and lynching, however, but all committed by members of the Legion, acting as such, had been reported and verified. Most of them came under the Legion program of patriotism and 100% Americanism. Its members cut the electric wires at Fritz Chrysler's concert, drove 2 men out of Desdemona, Texas, quote, cleaned out a newspaper in Astoria, Oregon. In Santa Barbara, a committee of 6 legionnaires horsewhipped an editor and paid a fine of $100 for their fun. In various places, legionnaires stopped Deb's meetings, and in Great Bend, Kansas, they stopped a farmers' nonpartisan league meeting. They beat up 4 speakers and tarred and feathered J.O. Stevich, editor of the Nonpartisan Leader, and Carl Parsons, a veteran of the World War, and drove ex-Senator Burtin of Kansas and George Wilson of Oklahoma out of the county. On occasions, the Legion led in breaking up of meetings of, quote, red-hot Bolshevik named Charles A. Lindbergh, whose son, Slim, or Lucky as he was called, was piloting him around in an airplane. Motherfucking Charles Lindbergh was too Bolshevik for the Legion.
Okay.
I mean, so this is pretty hardcore stuff, right?
Yes.
So they're active throughout the country, disrupting
that was
on
1 year.
Various levels.
That was 1 year, 1920.
Yeah. But they're not even just like breaking up strikes. They're doing that, beating people with pipes, but also, assaulting journalists.
Yeah.
Stopping
concerts.
I mean, this is cancel culture gone crazy.
You will be talking about the business plot, right?
Mm-hmm.
And will you be mentioning that certain association? I don't remember the exact name.
The Association of Fascist Veterans?
No.
That's a new one today.
Something like American Manufacturers.
Oh, yeah, NAM.
Yeah.
NAM, I'm not going too deep into NAM. NAM is here. I mentioned in the last episode, that NAM became a massive supporter of the American Legion, but not just the National Association of Manufacturers, but essentially...
so they were supporters of the Legion.
Yeah.
Okay.
As well as like DuPont Chemical was a big supporter of the Legion. JP Morgan Bank was a big supporter, both politically and financially. Even though the Legion, I think their official like income was all from dues,
right?
But
with the kind of with the backing of all these people who are founders who are politically and connected to the business world, and then connections with the business world, of course, an organization like that is going to succeed.
Their president ran
president's son,
all the textile manufacturers.
Yeah. Because I had some thought when you mentioned this obvious kind of conflict between the American Legion and the American Firsters or Lindbergh crowd. If there was,
this is before America First, though.
Okay.
Yeah. This is before that.
Because there is some narrative from some people who are like critiques of the American Empire or whatever, who talk about the business plot and things that came later as like a conflict between 2 different sides of the like American ruling class. Which
fine.
I don't know if it has any. I never read anything about it. I just heard some people talking about it. Maybe I can mention it later on when you actually talk about the business plot.
Yeah, absolutely. We will get there. Yeah, but that is a ways away yet.
Yeah.
So Charles Lindbergh pooping on a bird. Okay, yeah. And so Henry Luce's Time magazine opined in 1920 here.
Ever since the Centralia, Washington massacre of 1919, the nation's most potent strike-breaking force has been the American Legion.
Yeah. Thus, it was kismet that two like-minded fucks would both rise to power at about the same time. For the Legion, that fuck would be Alvin Owlsley. Alvin Owlsley. Try saying that 3 times fast. Who would become national commander in 1922. For Italy, that would be Benny Boy Mussolini. Owlsley and his buddies in the brass must have been watching Benny's rise for quite some time, though official comment was kind of rare up to this point. I say this because as soon as Benny Boy became, Capo del Governo, Duce del Fascismo y Fondatore del Impero, Alvin Owlsley proclaimed this.
If ever needed, the American Legion stands ready to protect our country's institutions and ideals as the fascisti dealt with the destructionists who menaced Italy.
And asked by an observer whether or not that meant potentially taking the state, Owlsley said this.
Exactly that. The American Legion is fighting every element that threatens our democratic government. Soviets, anarchists, IWW, revolutionary socialists, and every other red. Do not forget that the fascisti are to Italy what the American Legion is to the United States.
Yeah.
That's the full-ass context of that quote.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right.
Which, I mean, we talked about before, like what they mean by democracy.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's
So
going to
this-
keep going today, actually. We're going to get a little more of that today. And thus, Boise started one of history's greatest love affairs. The Legion's decade-long Roman holiday, basically. Plus, what a perfect time to declare the creation of Americanism Day, which the Legion saw as its answer to the insidious May Day and its, quote, evil effects.
Yeah.
If you're curious, Americanism Day, if you want to celebrate this year, is the day before May Day.
Okay.
Okay.
You know, got there first. Fuck you, commie. So, these like destructionists and undesirables of the Legion include literally any pacifist group, a number of church-based youth groups, a lot of college and high school instructors, and I'd love to talk about the youth program that came out of that. I know we got even people waiting to hear about that, about like Boys State and stuff.
Yeah.
But we're fucking out of time on this episode, so we're going to push it to some other thing. But I want to talk about it a lot. But the usual list of radicals was categorically organized into 2 groups. There was the, quote, foreign-born anarchists and the, quote, idealists, noting that the idealist was by far the most dangerous and were themselves subdivided into honest idealists and dishonest idealists. That is to say, fools or hucksters, right? So they were at work in the schools, the shop, and the fraternity, and the labor union, and the church. And what exactly did the Legion think was going to happen if these idealists came to power? Well, in 1923, an official Legion booklet called God and Country, the stakes of the struggle were laid bare. And I'm going to tell you right now, this one's a bit of a long one, but this is the fullest description of their enemy at this point. And also, I'm going to take it to a weird place right after this. Be forewarned.
There would be a United States that no person on the face of the earth would trust, whose money would have the value of its weight as old paper, and which would loom before the world as a menace of the most awful sort. There would be no playgrounds, no athletics. Starvation and desolation would take the place of happiness, contentment, and liberty. Soldiers here, there, everywhere, with loaded guns and fixed bayonets to subject the people to the will of the council of 12 men, reputed to be the representatives of the people, but who are, as a matter of fact, self-appointed dictators. There would be no ambition, no initiative, no inventions to keep step with the progress of time. Above all, no religion. With the teaching of the Bible absolutely ignored, the ignorant, the lawless, and the animal would take the place of the civilized, the religious, and of liberty. They would take the world back to the Stone Age, where each self-confessed radical hopes to become ruler under the rule of might is the master of right. It is these people in our midst who carry their soapboxes to the corners and preach the doctrine of discontent, who card index the prisoners in our penitentiaries, meet them at the gate at the expiration of their term, and with food and clothing win them over to their side, the side of unlawfulness, and induct them into the organization that moves in the dark. These organizations are many. A thorough study of these organizations has been made. Almost without exception, the persons at the heads have served time in jail for some crime.
You are goddamn right we have. Quote, the failure to display inspection/emission sticker. Motherfucker. I spent 24 hours in a tiny jail in cold little PJs. I'm a fucking menace. That's right. So... any thoughts about the doomed world we're creating here?
I mean, there's a lot there, a lot of great stuff.
A lot of gold. I mean,
from the very beginning, it's like there will be no economy. Trump said something very similar to this just the other day. He was
in many ways, we're living in hell right now.
It might have been from the same rally, but he's like, there's no playgrounds anymore. Nobody, the baseball fields, they're all gone. The communists took it all away. Like it's that exact thing. Yes. But then also that like everybody will be, at bayonet point from the control of 12 people who call themselves, representatives of the people. Not unlike the Legion, which is comprised of people of the ruling, the like top of the ruling American class and business interests.
Yeah.
Yes. At bayonet point, beating people
at lead pipe
point. Yes. It is a crucial difference there for expressing an opinion contrary to, and then the stuff taking back to the Stone Age. That's great. Zerzin's laughing.
Yeah. What's your review of the enemy here?
I don't think I have any thoughts at this point.
Okay. All right. That's wise because shit gets even weirder. You might want to save them. And I'm going to give you something right now to chew on there, right? To add to the meal, to the buffet. So on that 12 men comment, my sort of, let's say, overly sensitive Elders of Zion spidey sense went off a little bit on that. So I went down a little rabbit hole to see.
It's a very specific number, no?
Well, it is, but it's not a number that's in the Elders of Zion, but it definitely has this feeling to it. And I just kind of wanted to just explore a little bit. And I reread the Elders of Zion for the third time in this podcast and just spent a little time with it.
You know what you should read? There's that book.
Mutual Aid, Factor in Human Evolution.
No. Horrible.
The Conquest of Bread.
No.
Oh.
I think it's called the Committee of 300 or something.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's on the, that's, yeah.
I think it's written by some ex-CIA guy or something like that.
I think that is a post-war book, on the post-war book list, but that is coming. Thank you for reminding me.
CIA has books on their website.
They have everything. It's a great website. Their reading room is amazing.
Like, for example, Committee 300 is on the CIA website.
Oh, I love it. Most of this shit that I got was off the Legion website. Their archives are extensive and they don't give a shit what's in them. Yeah. It's really easy to just figure out what they're about. So anyway, on this Elders of Zion thing, I went down a little rabbit hole just to see. And there actually is some overt connections that develop in the 30s. But there isn't really a specific mention of any group of 12 people, like I said, in the Elders of Zion. There is a line that has this vibe, which is something like, and it does the same purpose. It says, we shall it has to be an evil voice because it's the elders. We shall exclude in the course of instruction state law and also all that concerns the political question. These subjects will be taught to a few dozens of persons chosen for their preeminent capacities among the number of the initiated. So there would be these dozens that would be educated in the real politics, all not really helpful, but my itch was still kind of there when I was reading this. Yeah. So because the big plan has other things to it that sort of scratch itches, so I thought maybe it wasn't Elders of Zion. Maybe I was thinking of International Jew, and Dearborn Independent. So I kept going back and I started reading those again, and there is actually, I really feel like there is an influence here, but That's maybe more than passing. Okay, so basically this thing was written, this Legion thing was written in 23. The Elders of Zion was published in English in the first like monograph in 22. But we know that Henry Ford had already been publishing those excerpts all the way back in 1920 in the Dearborn Independent and the International Jew. So both the Protocols and the International Jew make reference to ending the teaching of the Bible to destroy civilization. Okay. The Protocols explicitly mention dictators that would convince the people to, like the militaries of nations, to turn their weapons against, upright citizens. That's in there. Hiding their evil dictatorial pretensions behind democratic facades is all in there. All of these are in that Legion text, but again, it's not super conclusive. A lot of these show up in a lot of places, but again, there's not really like direct links until the 30s, and they're still in 22. But the thing that really got me was the comment on athletics. Like that stuck out because of the Legion archives, I've been reading a shit ton of communist propaganda too, and I knew for a fact that the Communist Party was a big promoter of like civic athletics and stuff like that. Like it was a big, very much there. Thing. And these guys knew that because they would reprint their materials in full. That's how I knew it, So I was thinking like, why the athletics thing? Where do they get that from? Who's part of what plan is that? And so I think the Legion's disagreement here isn't with the Communist Party. I think Henry Ford might have the answer to this. And so I went and I found a real live recording of Henry Ford that I believe might help us answer this question about why are they taking away all the playgrounds and sports? What does he mean by that? So Henry Ford in the flesh.
Jews are not sportsmen. This is not set down in complaint against them, but merely as analysis. It may be a defect in their character, or it may not. It is nevertheless a fact which discriminating Jews unhesitatingly acknowledge, whether this is due to their physical lethargy, their dislike for unnecessary physical action, or their serious cast of mind. Others may decide. The Jew is not naturally an out-of-door sportsman. If he takes up golf, it is because his station in society calls for it, not that he really likes it. And if he goes for collegiate athletics, as some of the younger Jews are doing, it is because so much attention has been called to their neglect of the sport that the younger generation thinks it necessary to remove that occasion of remark.
He said Jews pretend they like golf?
Yeah, Jews pretend they like golf, but they actually don't. He said Jews are not sportsmen. And they fake being into athletics when they're doing it. Now this
is that just because they were mad that like every early white basketball player was Jewish.
In fact, he points out like he says in this quote, I know his accent is hard to understand. He wasn't a great public speaker, as we know. That's why he had like this Christian identity guy speak for him. But he pointed out that as younger Jews are into college athletics, like basketball maybe. And but again, they're only doing that because they've been called out on neglecting sports, so younger generations think it's politically necessary to remove that complaint. But none of that, that's just setting this up. The whole point of that quote is to lead into his multi-article assault on Jews in baseball. And this is an obsession of Henry Ford's. The Dearborn Independent article published a year before this Legion text, or a series of articles that came out a year before this Legion text, that the Jews have destroyed baseball by being money-minded, and since they only care about material things and not the nobility of the athletic contest, in the same way they don't care about the nobility of the business contest, right? Or the nobility of war. They're just in it as a means to some sort of materialistic end, as Henry Ford said. They are likely to go on, in that case, he says, destroying all American sports until no sports are left in this way. So it's a stretch to link that directly to this like obsession with athletics and the Legion, but maybe not as much as one might think, because it's, if you remember, like this is peak Dearborn Independent time when literally every Ford car sold in the country had Dearborn Independent material in it. It was had like Elders of Zion articles in it, So I mean, this was very much there, and this is also, again, remember, the Legion is mostly a Yankee industrialist thing, not exclusively, obviously, but the vast majority of them. In fact, like income-wise, the Legion as a whole, right? So given like the 1 million members it had in this time or more at this point, as a whole, the Legion had 30% higher income than the average population of America.
Mm-hmm.
So that's with a small group of industrialists leading the thing
Mm-hmm.
and a bunch of veterans that are just there because it's an association. So you imagine the level of income required for this core group to actually be able to push that million group of people up,
Right.
fucking 30% over the rest of the country, Like there's a lot of money here.
And it doesn't seem to be that much of a stretch of a tangent that you just went on.
No.
Because also, I mean, they singled out the whole thing about the foreign-born anarchists or whatever, which we know in large part from like the first Red Scare deportations back to Russia, that a lot of those people were Jews, right? I mean, that was the whole thing, right? Now, Emma Goldman and Berkman were among those deported, and if you ever read their accounts of what that trip was like and who they were talking to on the boat back to Russia, it's a lot of communists and anarchists and going back to Russia, and a lot of them are Jewish.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that's part of this whole, and then also like the ones hiding among us, right, being the most dangerous. It's a typical kind of.
Yeah. And I think there's going to be some talk also about American aristocracy coming up, which might also speak to this. So, I guess if any listeners are more familiar with the Committee of 300, it sounds really fun. I think we're going to definitely have a look at it. But if there is some Council of 12 reference in there, please let us know.
Yeah, I think I heard something like that.
Yeah.
Maybe it's 13. I'm not sure.
Well, still a weird thing to say.
Yeah.
In ostensibly a veterans aid organization. So it's fun to remember that that's what this is supposed to be.
Yeah.
Considering that there is no veterans aid yet.
Yeah.
But a lot of this going on. Yeah, 1923, pretty good year for the Legion. So the Harding administration, once again, brought a ton of these good old Legionnaires into his administration. Unfortunately for them, though, the president's death that same year would reveal numerous corruption scandals, and one of the founding members of the Legion, we talked about this in the last episode, actually, going back to the Plattsburgh group, he was caught up with a big old bag of money, advocating for German steel interests. He did land on his feet, though, because what's the Legion for if not veteran support,
Fair.
Yeah, they backed him up. In 1925, the Legion brass had a super fun field trip out to Rome at, quote, the personal invitation of Benito Mussolini, Premier of Italy.
Wow, okay.
Sadly, there aren't many details on what went down out there, but I can say...
That's not on their archives and their site as much as the strike break and...
No, a lot more detail about that. They just mentioned that they had a good time, basically. I can say...
The food, you wouldn't believe it.
Yes. Couldn't eat it.
Yeah, actually, with these guys.
Hard.
How do you eat spaghetti?
Hard to find a glass of milk out there at a restaurant. Tell you what. I can say by this point that, excuse me, sir, do you have grape juice? At this point, Mussolini was considered to be the gracious host of the Legion post in Rome. They, like financially, like he supported it.
Oh,
yeah, actively. And they were aware of this, and they thanked him a lot for it.
Wait, a Legion post in Rome. So the American Legion
has international posts.
Had its international posts.
Yeah, because you ostensibly because you had veterans all around.
But for American veterans.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
American veterans who stayed in
Mussolini
Italy?
had his own veteran thing going on.
Yeah.
I don't really understand too much about that post. I think the fact that it's even there is really fun and suspicious. But I believe there was also a post in Paris that was permanent, and a couple of other places post World War I. Germany, don't.
Paris,
think
I could see also because there were a lot of American troops there after the war and helpers. Hence, like how von Siatsky met his future wife.
It all comes together.
Yeah.
I imagine that, the Legion commander and Mussolini held hands in the mouth of truth and whispered, "I love you," before returning home. Ti voglio bene.
So Mussolini funded the American Legion in Italy.
Funded and possibly fondled.
Oh.
Yeah. In 1927, Legion boy named Jonathan Thomas Taylor Huh? Yeah, Home Improvement. Jonathan Taylor Thomas is Home Improvement. Jonathan Thomas Taylor is a Legion guy, as if we just made him up in like Imperium 2 or something. At the time, he was the treasurer of a chemical weapons lobby, like the chemical weapons lobby. And he laid out before Congress the official Legion attitude towards said chemical weapons.
Very popular thing after World War I, I'd imagine.
Yeah. It was an uphill battle.
People had a really great experience with chemical weapons.
He and the Legion were very pro chemical weapons. And if you weren't sure where this was going to land, the phrase he actually used was unequivocal support. So unsurprisingly, the U.S. refused to ratify the Geneva Conventions, despite being a signatory to those conventions. They wouldn't ratify them till the fucking 90s. We had plans, didn't include fucking pansy-ass prohibitions on chemical weaponry. What are we going to do? One hand tied behind our back there. So at the same time, that same year, Mussolini invited our boys back to Rome to celebrate their 10th anniversary, which is a very interesting date to set because they didn't officially form until 1918. 1919, like 18 at the earliest. 1919 would be the first national convention. So what did happen in 1917 was that the American Legion Incorporated became the Expeditionary Force. Right? Yeah, so that's what they were celebrating. Anyway, at this meeting, Legion brass met personally with Mussolini and shared notes about how he was keeping Europe stable and Bolsheviki free. In fact, the Legion Post actually wasn't doing great. They were noticing, and again here, they were again thanking him for all his fucking support, because time had passed and new wars were frustratingly rare. It's already fucking 27 at this point. When's the next war gonna be? So so they're like losing their, like people are not really showing up at these foreign posts. Like, why would they?
Did they just go to Rome? Did they go anywhere else in Europe? Do you know?
They will. They will indeed. So the following year, we find an interesting article in American Legion Monthly titled "Why America" by some fuck named Clarence Buddington Kelland, Legionnaire. I wanted to make sure we took a minute to look at this thing in some length, actually, because this is where the question of American aristocracy comes up explicitly. So this is a full. Well, no, I edited it down as best I could.
What do you mean by aristocracy in this case?
Well, I'm going to tell you. Okay. Or rather, let's let Clarence Buddington Kelland tell us. Who else could but a guy with that name, right?
In America, you can search every square mile, and you won't find one man who can claim superiority over any other man by reason of birth, or who can claim any special privilege because of inherited title. Naturally, we have something which compares to an aristocracy. You can't help that. If every social inequality could be erased from the world tomorrow, by noon the next day, there would be established some kind of aristocracy. Ours is mostly of wealth, though we have a trifle of family tradition. But the slick thing about our aristocracy is that if you make any of them take off his full dress coat, you will find the marks of the armbands his grandfather wore around his red undershirt. Our aristocracy is the result of opportunity. Some fellow stepped out in his blue jeans and he earned it, and none of our aristocrats, so-called, can hang on to it merely by being born. No, sir, he has to step out and keep his eyes peeled, or some fellow in a red flannel undershirt will step up and grab it away from him. You cannot have art without wealth to buy paintings and statues. You cannot have architecture without wealth to erect buildings. You cannot have music without the leisure to enjoy music and the money to educate one to appreciate music. These, when all is said and done, are luxuries, the most splendid of all luxuries. Anybody, any nation which has them may well be proud. We have lifted the education of an entire nation to a point never reached by any other nation. We have had more full stomachs. We have spread luxuries more widely among the people even than some of the countries which are our most severe critics. Curiously enough, these European persons who point their fingers of shame at us and finger of pride at themselves are not patting themselves on the back for what they've done in the present generation. Art, certainly Michelangelo, Titian, Raphael, Rembrandt, Gainsborough, and 1,000 others. But this year? After a while, I began to hold up my head a little bit more. It took me a look at the charges they bring against us of newness, of wealth, and of being businesslike. Really, businesslike is not so bad after all. Spain was wealthy once, with gold it stole from Mexico and Peru, which labored to produce it. England had known great wealth, brought to her by the conquest of incredibly rich empires, such as India. Then I look at our wealth. Subject people haven't brought it to us. We didn't find it hidden in the... Excuse me, sir. Sir, please. Please. Subject people...
Oh, people.
There never have been, nor did they bring us wealth. We didn't find it hidden in the earth, though vast natural resources have been the root of it. Okay. On the contrary, our wealth seems to me to be the direct product of intelligence. We have grown rich because we have had the brains to invent. The riches of the world flow our way because we have had the skill to think up and to produce articles which all the world must have.
So our aristocrats make your aristocrats shit. It still kind of sounds like ours are working for them, but I get the guy's point, right? So
it's got this great American obsession with aesthetics as a mark of class.
Also,
so, like,
Trumpy.
I mean,
yes.
yeah, right. Like the
gold sneakers,
rich ass motherfuckers driving like pickup trucks that they never haul shit in.
Yeah.
Like this is like, once he takes off his petticoats and he's got a red flannel shirt and blue jeans.
Yes.
Like, just like, get the fuck out of here. What are you talking about?
Yeah,
this is like, okay, you dress the part and like folksy language and this,
Yes, exactly.
But also, I mean, what a load of horse shit. Holy shit.
Yeah. We didn't extract our wealth from anyone. We've never subjected a population.
Yeah. And also he said that you constantly have to fight for the wealth that you have. Others, like, how is that an aristocracy?
Yes. That's a good point. Well, that's the thing. But that thing is our American aristocracy comes from struggle. It's like the most fascist version of an aristocracy somehow.
But I mean, like, if that were even true, and it's not. I mean, just look at the fucking people that founded the American Legion.
Yes. Well, yes. Yeah. What, you mean Theodore Roosevelt the third, Hamilton Fish Stuyvesant the third? Yeah. To Franklin D. Olivier.
I mean, all aristocracy. I mean, okay, the European one for sure, but like I guess the Indian one, the ancient one, they all portrayed themselves as warriors. That was kind of, it's not unique. I mean, they even more insisted on the fighting aspect.
I think probably creeping Aryanism maybe has a role in some of this as well.
I mean, but like, the thing that he's like, oh, it's not, they had to fight. Each generation had to fight. The Stuyvesant family didn't have to fight for anything since their first Dutch ancestor like bought Brooklyn.
Yes.
For like a bead. Yes. And then, literally forever they have been, what the fuck are you talking about?
Well, listen, no, Hamilton Fish III got his money because he was smart. Yeah, exactly. Now stick around for a word from our commander after he returns from his U.S. SEAL board meeting, and we'll get on with the meeting here. So,
by the way, Clarence Buddington Kellen.
Thank you.
Very prolific novelist, and it says here on Wikipedia. We might not need to include this, but
I love
still that. Kellen's name lives on in the dozens of motion pictures adapted from his work, including Speak Easily, starring Buster Keaton.
Heyo.
Lots of like Mr. Deeds Goes to Town, starring Gary Cooper.
No way.
Is based off of something that he wrote. Lots of like
interesting A-list shit.
Damn,
he must have been in the Hollywood Post with Lorna and Jarek there. Yeah. So of course the Legion went to Mussolini's house in 27, right? So come 31, it was Il Duce's turn to send someone to the old Legion post. And he sent his DC-based ambassador, Giacomo De Martino, who came by to extend official greetings to the National Executive Committee from Papa Benny himself. A short while after this meeting, and I'm not making any claims about connectivity here, it's just a fun year for the Legion is all I'm saying. But the American Legion founder, that Stuyvesant guy, Hamilton Fish III, around this time was sidling up with Nazi agents in the U.S. and expressing all kinds of admiration for Hitler and his bullshit. Well, Hamilton Fish III is proposing an official definition of communism to the U.S. Congress. It narrowly fails, but the Legion itself would adopt it as their official definition. So this American Nazi is attempting to define communism permanently for the U.S. Congress, which never in the end settled on a definition, by the way.
But the Legion did.
The Legion did, and this is it. Number 1, hatred of God and all forms of religion. That's number 1. Okay. Number 2, destruction of private property and inheritance. Okay. All right. Getting better. Number 3, absolute social and racial equality, promotion of class hatred. Sounding okay. Number 4, revolutionary propaganda through the Communist International, stirring up communist activities in foreign countries in order to cause strikes, riots, sabotage, bloodshed, and civil war. Okay, we're losing us at the party, I know, but here we go. Let's keep going. 5,
it's like a Nazi swing song, no?
Yeah, no, actually, you need that on the. You want some commune?
You're right. Oh God, we do need that on the board.
Yeah.
Oh yes,
Motor and
absolutely.
Rice. It's something nice.
Yes, thank you. All right, love a reason to update the soundboard. You know I do. So okay, it goes on. Destruction of all forms of representative or democratic government, including civil liberties such as the freedom of speech, of the press, of assembly, and trial by jury. Fun side note. American Civil Liberties Union, not a friend of the Legion.
Also, they're talking about freedom of the press, so they were like,
that they owned.
They were beating a journalist with, with like a fucking bullwhip. Like
they whipped a journalist. Yes. So, and 6, the ultimate and final objective is by means of world revolution to establish the dictatorship of the so-called proletariat into one world union of Soviet socialist republics with a capital in Moscow. Ooh. Okay. So Congress, I said, didn't pass this as a resolution, but it is easy to see how very influential this view was to succeeding generations of Cold War goons.
Right.
Again, remembering that the CIA came out of Legion founder fucking Wild Bill. It's not a 1-to-1, but yeah.
Right.
So just to sum this up, as the Legion is giving back rubs to Mussolini in exchange for rent, one of their Nazi founders is in Congress setting terms for Chapter 2 of the Red Scare. So
that's Fish's definition.
It is pretty fishy. It is indeed.
Okay.
Number 1, hatred of God. But Fritz, you might say. The Legion surely repudiated fascism in America. No? Well, yes, Boris. They did indeed do that. Sort of. In the Legion's annual fucking report to Congress that they made every year in 1932, the Legion responds to rising criticism of capitalism in America stemming from its own congressional members by saying the Legion responds with like, yeah, okay, capitalism can be rough, but hear me out.
The remedy? It is not fascism or communism or any like patented nostrum. It is simple, old-fashioned, homemade preparation. Its true name is best expressed in the term Americanism, meaning the right of every man to work and receive pay and be protected in the rewards of his industry, whether by hand or by brain. That is Americanism, which is another name for equality of opportunity. Mr. Young is right, is that some conditions are a, quote, disgrace, but not to capitalism as he thinks. The disgrace is in the semi-feudalism, which in many lines has supplanted capitalism or Americanism, insidiously and slowly, first by favoritism, then by monopoly, and then by merging monopolies. The condition of unemployment and the unequal distribution of the rewards of industry have been brought about. There is need for legionaries and all others to go into politics to restore the sway of Americanism in its pure, undiluted form, which will guarantee to men the bread they earn and which will apply tested old doctrines to new conditions. We have too long been trying to put new wine into old bottles.
So this is the standard, like, it's crony capitalism is the problem, not...
I want to comment on that and then maybe get your guys' feedback, actually. Mm-hmm. There is, like, Hitler and Mussolini, at least in rhetoric, were also about monopolies ruining things, shit like that. Mm-hmm. But there's a big distinguishing mark here between the Legion's Americanism from Nazism and Italian fascism. And that is definitely the overt kind of devotion to capitalism as a principle, right? Mm-hmm. The Legion takes care, as Boris pointed out, to distinguish between like the false capitalism of monopolies and the true capitalism of equal opportunity, which is something that neither Hitler nor Mussolini ever fucking tried or wanted to do.
Yeah, there was a kind of a European fascist distinction between different kinds of capital that you mentioned, but it was financial versus productive capital and labor.
Yeah. It's not dissimilar here. Yeah. But I think maybe partially because of that, but for maybe other reasons as well, I think this difference is ultimately kind of superficial. And this is what I want you guys' comment on, in the sense that it occupies kind of, in a way, it occupies like the same sort of like mythological holding space, and for like that socialism initially did for Mussolini and Hitler in very really different ways, though. But what I mean is that it is also, in a weird way, this like, even though they are capitalists, this devotion to like some free American capitalism is just, I think, cynical in the same way that, like, especially like, I mean, the way that fascism, I mean, it's hard to make a generalization because they're all very different cases, but like, I feel like their treatment of this idea of a free market capitalist system is not libertarian. It's something else. And it's sort of like their cynical entry point for their third way. So like in Europe, you have, the capitalists and the monarchy, the church, not super popular at the moment. People fucking hated them. And the people that hated them the most were also the best organized. They were the most prepared. They were going for it. So socialism was like the oppositional position. And through it, you had these guys worming their way into a third way, even if it was not genuine. Americanism can't really have a third way in that same way. It straight up can't position itself against capital. And it absolutely doesn't want to seem like it grew from any sort of socialist rebellion, right? Those things are like off the table. But it nonetheless must present itself as for the workers or the common man, right? In some way. So instead, they offer this like kind of like weak tea about the freedom of opportunity, meaning like good capitalism of the industrial aristocracy. So it's not entirely a free market. It's a guided one by the industrial aristocracy against the bad capitalism of the monopolies and the materialists that are only concerned with profit, which is constantly said in Legion discourse. This grubby interest in profit is what keeps America from being great, basically.
So it needs like an enlightened industrial elite.
With the nobility of work in mind. And so these guys, they're not libertarians in that sense. They're more like stewards or like shepherds of American freedom in that sense, right? They're capitalists, of course, but they're more than willing to bring capital to heel if the noble struggles and personal challenges that render capitalism the judge of this new American aristocracy or nobility fall to the materialists, right? They'll step in. And when I more and more start thinking about that, it becomes impossible not to see why Elders of Zion type shit would go over so well in leadership in the Legion. But I don't know. So what do you guys think about that?
I don't know. Like it, maybe there is some connection like when we talk about this and what I mentioned earlier when I asked you about if you will talk about the business plot. There is like, so one of these like critics that I mentioned of like the American state and empire is this guy called Peter Dale Scott. I never read anything from him. I like listened to a few interviews with him. He's an old guy who I think he's Canadian actually, and he's kind of a lefty, more kind of left liberal critic of the American empire and state and so on. One of these people he's an academic, quite an established guy, but one of the people who concentrates very much on like JFK assassination and so on. And I think he's actually one of the first people who used the term deep state like many decades ago when analyzing what's going on in America and conflicts, what he thinks are the conflicts inside of the American ruling class and so on. Okay. And then he talked about I think I heard this from him. He talked about this conflict between like two groups of American capitalists. Yeah. And one would be represented by, I don't know if this is true or not, but
we're actually starting with the business plot right now. Yeah. But give this background though. Yeah.
So I think he talked about the conflict between like capitalists who were kind of gravitating around the Council on Foreign Relations.
Could it be Council of Economic Relations?
No, I think foreign relations.
Okay.
So like, so this would be like what fascists today or different kinds of right-wing people would call the globalists, I would say. So Allen Dulles and the people who founded the CIA or who were dominant in it were people like that.
Yeah.
And then the other side were more kind of the continuation of more kind of isolationist people. And they were represented, according to this guy, by NAM, I think you mentioned.
National Association of Manufacturers.
Yeah. So now I don't know if this makes sense or not. So, for example, people who founded the John Birch Society were NAM people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that would be like, and I mean, both of these groups of people were like very fascist. And like, I mean, Allen Dulles was like a Nazi collaborator, supporter, a racist, and so on.
Just to put this in context of our podcast, so this Allen Dulles side would also be the side that we covered in the Henry Luce episode related to Life and Time magazine and all of that, and a lot of the diplomatic corps, right?
Yeah.
And then this American Legion side absolutely is that other side. It really is like the more NAM-backed. There is people from the American Legion who went out to start. We'll talk about them actually, who joined John Birch. So that division is there. Yeah.
So I don't know, like, because I think the first group was the more dominant one, and that's, I guess, the thing that kind of potentially differentiates the American situation from the European one. That the American ruling class, the side that didn't even want to touch any kind of, however, fake criticism of capitalism, was the more dominant one. So you couldn't have that type of fascism that you had in Europe. The one that called themselves National Socialist or anything like that, or that criticized capitalism from however superficial or wrong perspective. But they wanted to do it. In the United States, that was not the dominant position. Like, so you would have some kind of a, I guess, it was not this story exactly as we mentioned of, productive versus financial capitalism. It was a more kind of watered down thing. What was it? Monopoly.
Yeah, it was monopolies becoming greater monopolies versus equality of opportunity.
Yeah. So they wouldn't even say, productive capital, which is like aligned with the working class, which would be the classical fascist position.
They actually do. Yeah. They actually do. They do have a kind of I'll call it a workerist or a worker fetish. They do.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. But if you say it, equality of opportunities, that sounds a bit like more kind of closer to the liberal ideal than to fascism. Which I mean that's a scale. It's not necessarily very contradictory to each other,
right?
But maybe that explains some of the differences there between the European situation, and I don't know.
I don't necessarily see it through that kind of perhaps battle of factions in the ruling class.
Yeah,
I mean, the way that I understood the beginning of that quote that you read at least seems to be the classic. Well, we can't be, communism, fascism is kind of all the same, and I think the point that he's trying to make there is that kind of we did this before that, because they start in 1917, and what they're doing is rooted in something far older than that, and like you said, they can't, capitalism's unpopular in America at this time. There's a lot of strife, and they can't bring it back. They can't argue from some socialist position, but that's also because these people come from
the
WASP ruling class too, and for them it's just as easy. It's easier and perhaps more important to situate it in what is the American ruling ideology already, right? The veneration of the founding fathers, individual liberty, even though all this shit is ultimately meaningless to that, and they don't believe in that
exactly.
Shit. But that's the rationale that they're going to use, and one that does allow for quite a lot of bad things like manifest destiny or
listen,
whatever.
I'm glad you said that, because if I was going to
and the Roosevelt specifically, right? That's
not FDR, but Teddy.
Yes, this kind of expansionist idea of American America as like an imperialist force too.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, if the American founding war is the Revolutionary War, I think the American Legion's founding war is probably the Spanish-American War. I think that's the one that gets referenced the most as where like their version of Americanism began.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, maybe like one thing that's makes America different from the Europe, I mean, in this respect, is that like the only like more kind of mainstream politics in the 20th century that went into more this kind of European style direction of like some kind of reformist critique of capitalism was the New Deal.
Yeah.
But that wasn't, supported by the fascist types because FDR also wanted America to join the Second World War, which is what they didn't want.
Yeah.
But if you had some kind of a combination of like New Deal type of economical policy combined with an isolationist position, that would be the closest thing to, I guess, the European style of fascism in America. But
yeah.
And also there's the classic, I mean, the need to make it Americanist is so that there's American hostility towards anything European.
Yeah.
and so and like the whole thing.
When's the last time
America
you made a
doesn't
painting?
have
Europe?
monarchies and these kinds of things. That's for the Europeans, and in the New World they did something new, and that's the the ideal that they strive for. Even though,
well, since we're pressed up against the clock, I want to do the business plot here, right?
Yeah.
All right. So in 1934, a 100% American man, a celebrated 2-star major general in the U.S. Army, and an outspoken fan of none other than J. Edgar Hoover, like a fan, not even a friend, like a fan, they became friends, obviously. He was a semi-regular speaker at American Legion conventions. He came to HUAC one day, this man. Came to the HUAC, the House Un-American Activities Committee, in 1934 with a very funny story. So what happened was 2 notable legionaries approached him, him being General Smedley Butler, and offered him a literal fuck ton of money, like $2 million in that time money, to lead 500,000 troops in a coup against FDR.
That's another character played by Robert De Niro.
Awesome.
There is a new movie about the business plot.
Oh, really?
Or a show. I'm not sure.
Hey,
maybe
okay,
a show. It's
okay.
been criticized for watering down American fascism, I saw.
Well, that's perfect for us.
But it's like, I'm actually not sure if it's a movie or a show, but it's, and De Niro plays
Smedley. Awesome. Wow. All right. I'd love to see it, actually.
Or a character based on him. He's not called like that.
Okay. So this coup wouldn't necessarily mean killing FDR, of course. Smedley's Legion buddies specified, "We might even go along with Roosevelt and do with him what Mussolini did with the King of Italy." Assuming these guys were joking, probably because this was Gerald McGuire, adjutant of the American Legion in Connecticut, and the actual national commander, William Doyle, known in his time as the Kingmaker for his political influence. Smedley was like, lol, no, I'm not, gonna do that. That's crazy. And they asked him to think on it, saying that should Smedley refuse to be the, quote, man on the white horse, then the bangtail of the movement, then he would make the same offer to General Douglas MacArthur or former national commander of the Legion, Hanford McNider. So Smedley also learned that the reason that they were prepared to toss a cool $2 million personally to the general to compensate him was that the whole thing, they claimed, was being backed by longtime Legion allies J.P. Morgan and DuPont Chemical. So McGuire also tossed, this is from Smedley's report, $18,000 in 18 bills on the bed in the hotel room where they met. I think it was in Chicago. In Chicago, for his expenses during his weekend in Chicago, where he was going to give a talk to the Legion. Tossed it on the bed. That's
they had $1,000 bills on?
That's probably the first time they've ever been tossed on a bed. Yeah. Now I should say that meanwhile, this guy McGuire had spent a $25,000 trip to study Italian fascism and Nazism in Italy and Germany. And as it turns out, they also sent the soon-to-be national commander, Henry Chaillot, Chaillaux, Chaillaux, off to Europe to do a grand tour with his family of fascist groups there, spending time with the Nazis, Italians, and also the French. And that's where they first come into contact with Croix de Feu, the Legion of Fire.
Which is very much like them.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
Well, Henry in particular found it enlightening as far as their organizing tactics went. But I also wonder if that's because there was kind of, Chaillot, French Catholic, Croix de Feu, French Catholic. I wonder if there was like a personal affinity there too. But Chaillot would go on to write a book called Isms, which has a lot of pages. I got it. I found it. And it purports to be an exhaustive study of the various isms that want to compete with Americanism. And in the intro, it promises reviews of communism, anarchism, fascism, and Nazism. In fact, something like 260 pages of this thing are about the commies. And then there's like 8 pages on the Klan being a bunch of slacker pacifists.
Okay.
Yeah. So the coup thing. All right. This is dubbed the business plot, as we've said. When Smedley Butler reveals this plot to HUAC, it becomes a story for like a minute. It's weird, right? It's a big story, and then it's not. And the public relations machine really kicks into gear here. And there's reports that Smedley might have been kidding.
Is this the period when HUAC was like chaired by those eugenicists that we mentioned in the last episode I did?
Was it America in the 30s? Why, yes. So fucking coup. So they thought that maybe some of the press says that Smedley's insane and has lost his mind. Some say he's a Bolshevik now, on and on and on. But they couldn't have picked like a worse person to say this about. Like, this guy is like, he's like whiter than Wonder Bread, and he's squarer than, I think, also Wonder Bread.
I mean, there's a leader why they wanted him to be the head of their fascist group.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So instead, like Hearst and Luce and those press outlets who already hated FDR at that point sort of quietly stopped talking about it, and it went away from the major press outlets. FDR himself is said to have shouted, "Fantastic!" when he heard the full scale of the thing. Now, the usual implication of that is that he thought the plan itself was a fantasy, but I actually think he was just super pumped he had something to hold over JP Morgan and DuPont Chemical, like, fantastic, those fuckers. I got them now, and the Legion too. This didn't slow the Legion down at all. There were no consequences to this, none. The Legion kept on going. They completely got away scot-free with this shit, and they kept on making squadristi all over the country, occasionally making some half-baked critique of fascism in the press when folks started wondering if the Legion was fascist. They just kept doing fashy shit. So in November of 1935, the Executive Committee of Marine Post number 273 in Chicago voted unanimously in favor of creating a paramilitary unit of 5,000 carefully selected Legion members to support police actions in riots, disasters, or wherever needed. I should also say at this time, this is when there's a more direct Elders to Zion connection. So there's this guy, his last name is Jung. I'm forgetting his fucking first name, but he was running all sorts of crazy Elders to Zion propaganda shit. And I think he actually himself had a connection to that motherfucker whose name I can never remember, the original publisher who claimed to work on it with this Russian guy, whatever. But this guy Jung's publications were everywhere in Legion offices at this time, and like they're ordering pamphlets and stuff.
Okay.
So anyway, that's sort of an aside, but that's when it gets like really real, and you don't have to guess about whether or not the Elders of Zion is a big deal in the Legion at that point. Like, it just is,
I wanted to kill the wobbly. It's like the sad Legion guy. I wanted to hang the wobbly.
Jaw get blown off?
No, he has radium jaw because the crosses from Vierik.
And that's not a joke. It was horrible. All those poor women with the watches. Nightmare. Okay. Yeah, I forgot to mention actually during the business plot thing, there was another interesting thing. So Herbert Hoover was getting letters about this from Legionnaires who were like, "Yo, I saw some really suspicious shit in my post." And one of those was centered around the American, what was it fucking called? The American Farm Union or something like this. I'll get this Anyway, this California post of run by these, Legion brass said that they were also representing a new organization that was going to be called the American Fascist Veterans Association.
Okay.
Oh.
Yes. And they wanted to know if this guy would be their leader in the Nevada post that they were opening. So these guys are also caught up in this Butler thing somehow in like, not necessarily directly to Butler, but these are the guys doing the other recruiting, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't just these guys going to Smedley. It was also a bunch of guys saying this was going to happen to local post commanders and actually trying to build that army of 500,000 that they promised, So just interesting note there that there was something called that and Legionnaires were trying to start it. So, 36, the fascist diplomat Niccolo Sansanelli is invited to a Legion convention as the honored speaker of the Legion applauds as Sansanelli calls Mussolini, quote,
an ancient, a hero, and a genius.
The people are loving it. They begin banging on the idea of oaths of loyalty at this point for all teachers in America, mandating Americanism taught in schools. And by 1937, even the National Committee on Law and Order was getting eerily comfortable with vigilantism, announcing at the National Convention that year,
you must not arrogate your self-police authority.
I had to look up that word. I'm not ashamed of it. Arrogate. To assume the power of someone without justification, right?
You must not arrogate your self-police authority, but as a good citizen you may offer to be deputized.
You can offer it.
And assist the law enforcing agencies to maintain law and order. But there are times when law enforcing agencies either break down or are not sufficiently strong to cope with the situation. In that event, people have an inherent right to protect themselves. Society has a right to protect itself.
So you shouldn't do it, but you should definitely do it.
And I can't fucking wait.
Yes, you shouldn't do it. Please definitely do it. Exactly. Yeah. Pretty much the position Teddy took at the very beginning of the podcast.
And with probably a very open interpretation of what riot means.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. We can start one of those at any time. Don't worry. Yeah. So
it's based mostly on who's doing it.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. So Americanism director, Shiloh, a guy we talked about already in the 30s, which is basically like their propaganda and pressure wing. They actually call it the counter-subversive program. They started to fill Legion posts with literature from a guy named Joe Camp, who has also been on our show before in Arc 3. We mentioned him super briefly. Joe Camp, first of all, was a member of Coughlin's Christian Front. He was one of those like militia dudes that got picked up in one of the first big militia scandals, actually, of the time. One of them. But he was the founder of the khaki shirts. You remember them?
Oh, right.
The ones that dressed up like fucking British colonial fucking adventurers.
No, not unlike the Legion's uniform, no?
Well, yeah, actually.
Also kind of khaki.
Yeah.
Right?
So it's one of the funniest fascist shirt color guys was Joe Camp. So they had, they were tight. Joe was tight with the silver shirts and the Klan and, well, the Americanism commissar of the Legion couldn't get enough of him and bought thousands and thousands of copies of Joe's books to be distributed to posts. Leaflets all around the country. This is, again, the head of the ideological division of the Legion. Or, for 3 years he was. Moreover, Legion brass started bumping elbows with the likes of Father Coughlin, the Hitler-supporting original right-wing radio talk show host, a Catholic hero of Dearborn, we talked about in Arc 3.
Oh, yeah.
Also, Reverend Gerald E. Winrod, one of the founding fathers of Christian identity, and this whole group of California fascists and Nazi types who made up the union-busting shock troops of the Associated Farmers, that's the California group, and their violent war against the California farmers there. And let's also not forget our old Nazi face-melty buddy George Detheridge of the Knights of the White Camellia, even LARPier clan outfit. Shiloh had been inviting another general in this time, a much crazier motherfucker named General George Van Horn Mosley. Now, that should sound familiar because of how these guys all fit together in the second Legion plot to try to take over the government.
I also mentioned, I think, a bunch of these people, Mosley and Detheridge included
in the Colombians episode.
Yeah.
When we talked about their Colombians leader background in the 1930s.
Yep. Yeah. It's all connected now to the Legion. Again, KKK, they pick a side.
Yeah.
We're against the Colombians Incorporated and the American Legion Incorporated, any incorporated, without a K in it. So, fresh out of getting away with an attempted coup, scot fucking free already, Shiloh and his Legion buddies decide to go ahead and try again, because why the fuck not? Nothing happened to them last
Fair
time.
enough.
May as well do it again. I mean, there'd been no consequences, right? So, and this is from a reportage on the event by the Rural Observer. The mention of a guy named Garrison here is a reference to a Legionnaire who was strike breaking in California at the time. Okay. This is from the report. Garrison was one of several mentioned in this letter that they received as people who were to be invited to a secret conference to be held in Chicago, a conference to plan a fighting force to be used in the, quote, American Jewish War. The Chicago meeting, it was explained, quote, will not be of the organization leaders, but the leaders of the main group throughout the nation, Father Coughlin, Winrod, and a candidate for the Republican nomination for senator in 1938. Oh, that was Winrod. Homer Shiloh of the Legion, as well as other veteran leaders. Garrison of the Associated Farmers, also Legionnaire, in all men who are heads of large groups on our side of the fence. Out of that meeting, this is all quotes from this letter that the Rural Observer was sent by an informer. Out of that meeting will come only a program, the best we will do on the basis of what the general thinks can be done at the moment. So the general mentioned was not named, the report goes on, but Campbell in testifying said that he understood references to quote the general to mean General George Van Horn Mosley, retired Army officer. Our time is coming, the Deatheridge letter asserted. That's it. Deatheridge, this is a letter Deatheridge sent out to fucking Legion people. Somebody informed on this, sent it to this press. Yeah. So Deatheridge is writing a lot of these quotes here. And within 12 months, those that have borne the heartbreaking load of carrying on the fight will come into their own. You may rest assured that the general will take care of that.
And Deatheridge is a Nazi.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And an engineer. Let's give him credit where credit's due. At the time of the hearing, General George Van Horn Mosley was in Imperial Valley in California. That's where all this fucking like violent, murderous strike breaking was going on against farmers unions. His business there had not been determined, but he will travel to Washington where he has been subpoenaed to appear. According to further sections of the letter and witness testimony, the organization of the military force was planned as a force to be used against the Jews. Quote, the plan is to do this job peacefully and by force if that becomes necessary. The general will go through if it takes everything that you have, the letter explained. So this all came out once more in 1939 when Hamilton Fish III was literally handshaking Nazis in Germany, literally, and getting his face plastered all over Nazi press. He comes home to an adoring audience of Bunsters, Coughlinites, and silver shirts, and Christian identity psychos, and of course his Native American Legionnaires. And guess what happened to these guys now? Fuck all. This whole comes out, this whole plot, this whole second little coup they're planning, nothing happens. So we're completely out of time at this point. So just a quick word on what happens in World War II.
Yeah.
A little bit of what happens after, and that's it. Just to skip through it real quick. So guess which two wars in particular the Legion was suddenly isolationist about?
World War II.
That's yes. And what do you think? A lot of Americans going over to this one. American veterans even going over to this one.
Spanish Civil War.
Spanish Civil War.
Oh, right.
That's right. So,
of course.
Spanish Civil War, they took a hardcore isolationist position. Same when World War II rolled around.
Interesting.
Curiously, not the Korean War, not the Vietnam War. War. What about those two wars are have in common, I wonder?
I think
What?
they're probably a little sad about who they were fighting.
Maybe, yeah. Maybe a little bit bummed about that.
Maybe because the option of joining the fascists in the Spanish Civil War was not politically realistic. So they were isolationist because that was not on the table.
I prefer that explanation,
Yeah.
actually.
Or the Third Reich in the Second World War.
It's not so much that they felt
Yeah.
bad they had to fight the fascists. It's like they felt bad that they couldn't join them.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
So they didn't want to play.
No.
So in what way were they isolationist? I mean, I presume they were isolationist up until Pearl Harbor, and then they supported the war effort 100%.
Yeah, exactly.
But they were vocal about the U.S. not entering.
They were very anti-FDR, partially on that front. Yeah, interesting. So when the U.S. got involved in World War II, there is some lingering denialism at the very beginning of the U.S. involvement. So after Pearl Harbor, there's a lot of the Legionnaires really like the story about Pearl Harbor being an inside job or something like that, but like early versions of that,
Yeah.
and or claiming that it was a mistake or the Japanese didn't mean to or something like that. There's even at that point a small effort in their weeklies to downplay Pearl Harbor even.
Interesting.
But they do get in line, yeah. So by this time, this kind of normal dude that I mentioned a couple times, named Justin Gray, a veteran, gets to the Americanism Commission as like assistant director or whatever in the 40s after the Second World War, where Legion membership like doubles again. Like they end up with like 3 to 4 million people in the Legion after all this. So he finds the place littered with literature from Gerald L.K. Smith, Elizabeth Dilling, we haven't talked much about, an American Francoist named Mervyn K. Hart, who wrote this, which was something that the Legion was passing around.
If there were 6 million Jews within reach of Hitler, which number is widely questioned, and if they have all disappeared, well, where are they? It's not likely that many of these 6 million claimed to have been killed by Hitler and Eichmann are right here in the United States and are now joining in the agitation for more and more support for the State of Israel, even if the American Republic goes down.
Interesting take on that issue.
This is right after World War II?
Yes. Yeah. Wow. This is not a Legionnaire.
They got right to it.
This is shit going around in the Legion, right? In the brass, actually, of Legion. He wrote this for his group, which is called the National Economic Council, not the state one, but a private group. After Merwin Hart's death in 1962, just a fun point of Tenepod trivia, the National Economic Council would come under the control of Willis Carto when he was like rounding up all his monopolizing Holocaust denialism. So Justin Gray here was the reason why the Legion eventually had to take public stands against racism or the Klan at all. And to reward him for this, they closed down his post and sent him quietly packing home. Justin was amazed at how fashy the Legion brass was in his time there. He marveled at the craziest fucking letters from legionaries, or even just their dumbass fan base of like lead-poisoned patriots would get full attention from Legion commanders. No letter about somebody's foreign neighbor was too paranoid for these guys, the brass of the Legion. And here's a little excerpt from his book about his time there. This was the writer's comment.
If it takes such a short time to travel and an almost instantaneous time to send messages, why didn't Roosevelt send an alert to Hawaii?
So he says, why do you think my boss showed me this correspondence? For a laugh? No. He expected me to follow up on this grotesque letter with a dedicated research project into the subversive potentialities of UNESCO.
Of UNESCO?
Yes.
Okay.
Somehow
like the
UNESCO
UN agency for like protection of monuments?
Yes, exactly. Yes. So they began investigating a UNESCO conspiracy around World War II and Pearl Harbor. So after the Second World War, this is after the war. So after the Second World War, these motherfuckers grew to something like 3.5 million members. And finally in 1947, Congress called Justin's Nazi reading bosses, some of them straight up implicated in not one, but 2 plans to coup America, to testify as expert witnesses in the House Un-American Activities Committee. And pretty awesome. So I'm bummed that I don't have time to talk about their youth programs. That sucks. But maybe for we can fit it in somewhere in the future because there is a lot to talk about there. But
maybe a Patreon episode.
Something like that. But I do want to talk about Boys State. Ray, have you watched that film yet?
No.
Dude, it's going to horrify you.
Okay.
I can't wait till you see it.
I'm very curious to see
take
on it.
Yeah, Legion history is really long, so we got to move on. So
I mean, I'd imagine
boys,
that we're going to revisit them as we march on through the decades.
Yeah,
because they never go away.
I mean,
that's the amazing part about them.
We're leaving them at a pretty high point, I would say, right now. So, boys, quick verdict: American Legion. How fashy is it?
Pretty fashy.
Extremely. I mean,
they fit a lot of criteria to be fascists. Like World War I veterans started as a paramilitary, was bashing the workers' movement, all very fashy.
And I think arguably one of the most successful ones that we've ever talked about.
Yeah, that was my worry at the very beginning of this whole thing, if you recall.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I find this topic to be so fascinating. It really gets everything in there.
Yeah.
I mean, then we get to have the nice conversation about Americanism because it is their official ideology.
Yes, it is.
I really didn't know, it had come up, the Legion had come up a lot in the last American arc, and we had talked, I knew that they were doing some sus things.
Yeah.
But I really didn't know the extent.
They went pretty hard.
To
They went
which,
really hard.
I mean, this is, the kind of American fascist organization that's integrated into
I mean, they said it
everyday
themselves.
society. They said it themselves.
Their leader said we are the equivalent of the Italian fascists.
Yeah.
And if you're not sure what that means, yes, I do mean taking the state.
Yes. And then they tried to do a coup.
And then they tried to do it twice.
Yeah. So, I mean.
Oh, pretty incredible.
So,
It's
yes.
incredible, yeah.
Yeah. And I think interesting that it seemed like the coups all stopped when the Cold War started.
Mm.
Gee, I wonder why.
Yeah. Well, boys, putting them down for a while, although you can never quite leave the Legion because there's millions of them. And, once more, I think most Legionnaires probably have no idea
Oh, yeah.
about
absolutely.
any of this.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
For sure. Yeah.
Like, some of y'all fucking do.
Yeah.
Some of y'all do. But, yeah.
I'd imagine, they at their height when they had 3-some million members.
Yeah.
And they did something like push through the GI Bill, which is basically the U.S. government's subsidy of
Yeah.
of their veterans.
Yeah. And don't think there
And-
weren't internal discussions about whether or not that was Bolsheviki.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm sure there were. Yeah, boy.
And there's a whole, we could talk for hours about that alone.
Yes.
And the debates ideologically around that. And,
someday we probably will.
how that is
For sure.
reflected in
Yeah.
all this Americanist shit that we'll see later.
Yeah. Yes.
Because I imagine the people that went into the Birch Society weren't too excited about that.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't know, just a shout out to I'm setting up a joke here actually.
Okay, great.
Shout out to the historical IWW here for being, the greatest of all time, aka the
Bolsheviki.
Goats.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Hey there, all you free people enjoying your free episodes from The Empire Never Ended. Maybe scoot on over to patreon.com/tenepod and become a patron. We publish 3 additional premium episodes there alongside the 2 freebies each month. We're on Twitter too, also at Tenepod, but our Patreon is really where it's at. See you there, maybe? Yeah?